Hello, attendees to the webinar. It's Graham Jackson here. I'm the Chair of NHS Clinical Commissioners and just chairing this webinar today. So welcome to this event and thank you for hanging on the line. I appreciate you doing that for a few minutes whilst we get ourselves sorted. I'm going to give a quick introduction and then hand over to our presenters, and there'll be some time for questions after that. So NHS Clinical Commissioners have been working with NHS England on the EBI programme now the last couple of years, evidence-based intervention. And I'm involved in the programme board, along with my Chief Executive, Julie Wood, many of you will know. We've been implementing this programme the last few months, and today we're doing a peer learning session on benign skin lesions. We've chosen this particular area because it is the most contentious in the sense that the data is not moving in the way we'd like to see it move due to the complexity of this particular clinical area. I'm sure many of you have been involved in the background of what's been going on. Demonstrator community we've been working with over the last few months who've been helping us this and share some peer learning from that demonstrator community.
Not the one that should have
There's data on the skin lesions and the other parts of the EBI programme are available on the activity dashboard for you, which many of you or all of you should have access to. We can publish that data later. That is Get straight into the webinar and ask our presenters to introduce themselves. And there'll be an opportunity to take questions in 20 minutes or so. June.
So, good morning everybody. I'm June Ferguson and I'm Associate Director for the Clinical Effectiveness Team for North West London CCG.
Hello, my name is Chaksha Sharma. I'm Senior Business Development Manager for the North West London CCG Clinical Effectiveness Team. I work alongside Jude.
So today's learning is really about how North West London looks at designing our benign skin lesions policy and use the EBI policy. So first of all, just to set some context of who we are. So the Clinical Effectiveness Team in North West London, we cover planned procedures with a threshold. Some of you may know those as policies or base policies. We cover plans, those cover policy development and...
I don't. It's NHS Clinical Commissioners one, so I'm not sure.
Just hold on a second. So it's Graham back here again. We're getting some feedback in. Those of you on the call, can you hold yourselves on mute in the presentation, please? We are getting some feedback through the main speaker here. Thank you. June.
Thank you. So just about our actual planned procedures with the thresholds, and as I've said, people know them as evidence-based policies and policy policies. So in North West London, our team work across the 8 CCGs, and we have 47 clinical evidence-based policies that are in place. And for us, it's about making sure that we use the most effective resources and that we standardise clinical practice, and more importantly, there is equity and access for patients across the 8 CCGs in North West London. And there is approximately a 2 million patient population. So in terms of our whole system and how we monitor and assure ourselves, we have a compliance system, and it works on the basis that for every single policy that we implement, there is a form that needs to be filled in that assures us that the patients are being treated at the level that we've commissioned. And in essence, that really means that if a form doesn't arrive, then there is no payment to the provider. It's an approval notification system, and the scope of it is that if a procedure is carried out without a valid PPWT form being submitted, or if the form is late past the deadline, or it is incomplete, then we run a monthly challenge process against such data, and we simply challenge the provider and ask them to produce evidence of why they think that they should be paid for it. Now, in terms of the policies itself, they are evidence-based policies, very aligned to the EBI policies. We regularly refresh those using, I'm sure everybody's familiar, the latest NICE evidence. We have a policy development group across the whole of North West London, and I think it's fair to say that this is clinically led, but it also has commissioners on it and finance, and my team provides governance as well. And it gives the clinicians an opportunity to clinically debate the latest evidence base. We also receive business cases from provider trusts, because it is our thinking that just because we had one individual business case, that doesn't mean to say that it's not going to impact on our wider health economy. Now, just to finish off that part of the process, all our decisions, all the PDG do, the Policy Development Group do, is make a set of recommendations. They make a set of clinical evidence-based recommendations, and those go to our joint committee, where there is a wider debate, because you have to take on board the commissioning impact. Our PPWT process isn't just about contractual benefits. There is also making sure that there is benefits for the patient, and ensuring that there's equity in service provision across the whole of North West London. And if the patient does not meet the criteria, there is a tool for general practitioners or for the consultant to be able to explain to the patient and show the patient why they haven't met the criteria. We also have a helpline that patients can ring up, and we talk to them through the process. So turning to benign skin lesions itself, again, just to build a bit of context, so North West London, as everyone else in their duty to work within our challenging financial envelope, we are looking at a range of options to maximise the benefits of existing policies. So we're looking at a range of things. I'm sure this was familiar to most people, labelled as quick schemes. And one of the things that they asked our team to look at is, can you look at your portfolio again and see if there are any opportunities, either with looking at thresholds or also redesigning. So one of the areas that we identified, and it was good timing because it was also in line with the EBI policy, and I think it's important to say that our benign skin lesions policy was very, very closely aligned to the national policy anyway. It was an opportunity to look at benign skin lesions, and it was deemed as a case for change. Why we looked at this, it was a high expenditure in secondary care, so we looked at the SUF data backwards. We also undertook a desktop audit, because just because an area is high expenditure doesn't mean to say that it's not appropriate expenditure. So what we did was that we got our clinical team to look at all of the PPWT, a sample of the PPWT forms, and actually look at that level of granularity around what was the GPs and the consultant staff in their information, what were they actually, what boxes were they ticking with regards to the types and the sizes of the benign skin lesions. And based on that audit, benign skin lesions was one of the areas where it was felt that there could be a refinement of existing policies that would add benefit by maximising the whole pathway. And what we meant by that was actually there was such a high volume going to secondary care, but we had things that moved on since we had developed the policy, and it was an opportunity to look at whether some of that could happen in primary care, or for some of our CCGs, they actually had community providers. And I think it's fair to say the thinking behind that was that it could be done at a lower cost base. So in order to do that, I think there was recognition in North West London that that would not happen naturally, because if it could happen naturally, then why wasn't it not happening? And we were asked to run this with a program management approach. And one of the key things was, as I said, our team work across the whole of North West London. But what we really identified was that we needed buy-in from all of the 8 CCGs. They needed to own their local plan. We needed the business intelligence team to run the model and develop the model, and we also needed finance sign-off. So let's turn to the actual program scope. And it was really, really important that we were clear of what the program scope was. And there was 4 key schemes. One of them was to review the wording within the current policy, and just to make sure, because the current policy, like the EBI policy for North West London, was in essence that we would not fund anything that was deemed as cosmetic, and we would only fund things that were functional. I guess the EBI policy's only got that by the nearby added to it, but the majority of it was in line with what we had in North West London. So we were asked to look again and make sure that in the actual wording, so not changing any of the thresholds, but reinforcing some of the wording around functional elements, and also making sure that we were going to ask clinicians to provide additional supporting information, because even the functional element, they had to be at a high threshold in order for people to receive treatment. We also needed to make sure that we redesigned the pathway. In the old PPWT form, it was just a generic form, and it didn't really say or recommend where the treatment should take place. And what we've done now is that we've actually added into the policy and added into the PPWT form that, particularly for primary care, they would need to demonstrate why they felt that this patient could only be treated in secondary care. So once they've exhausted all of their primary and community avenues, they would need to then demonstrate, and the team do check that, and we audit that, and we send that feedback to the CCGs as well. One of the key things for me was about validating capacity and capability, both in primary care and community care. So if the essence of this was to reduce activity going to secondary care, the system had to be confident that they had the capacity to manage it in the primary provision, which was via a DES relationship, and that they had the confidence that the community providers, where there were them in CCG, also had the capacity to pull that activity back. The other thing that I think that we had to make sure as well is that they had the capability, which was something completely different. So all of our health system needed to be confident, including secondary care, that actually these providers couldn't just build capacity, but they also had the confidence that they had the capability to undertake the procedures that it was deemed that could be in this model that we could shift back into primary and community. In terms of engagement, we engaged with primary care. Of course we did. We engaged with secondary care as well, because we needed to understand that this was a change process. So if we had such a high volume of activity going into secondary care, we needed to be confident that secondary care clinicians were also brought into this model. So our primary care clinician, or our GP advisor, did actually go to visit some of her secondary care colleagues with the proposals and got feedback, and that was fed into the plan. So if we move to the governance, I've mentioned before the task and finish group, and it was having to be very clear what the expectations were of the task and finish group. So we got agreement at a strategic level to set this up, because it was important that senior management was brought into this. And some of the key deliverables and the key objectives for the task and finish group was to develop the commissioning model based on the soft data and the baseline that were validated clinically, so making sure that we removed anything that looked like 2-week wait or cancer upgrades. And what that really did was that built a model by CCG of what each CCG was expected, because it was part of their group plan, to deliver on a month-by-month basis. And the reason why we did that is, as I mentioned before, it was really important that each CCG was cited on that activity and they had ownership of it, and that they signed that off and we handed that over to them at the end of the task and finish group, and they were then responsible for the delivery, because they had that relationship with their community and primary care provider. We mapped that to the community provision, and we mapped that to the primary care provision. And we also made sure, as I said before, that the secondary care contractual lever was in place, so no PPWT form leaves the team without somebody being able to justify why that referral needs to go to secondary care. We also needed to make sure that there was a wider communication. There was an opportunity to reiterate the benign skin lesion policy, and also reiterate to our GPs that there was that provision, alternative provision out there. So there was the debt provision, and that there was the community provision. So I think some of our CCGs use that as a relaunch of what their local services did. The next page really talks about commissioning validation, and I'm more than happy to take that in terms of questions. It does get really technical in terms of the SUS and the SLAM data, but I guess the parameters of today is really more about how we work together as an organisation or as a team to make a step change. I've talked about the SUS and SLAM data, we've talked about the modelling, and we've also talked already with reference to that this was associated with a CRIP scheme, and it's tracked this financial year. So I guess in essence, and just to highlight now, we're in Chachu month 4 now. So just some of the key learning, because it's still early days, and I think on reflection for us, it really was about enhancing awareness and behavioural change through CCGs, the CCGs by relaunching their primary and community pathway. I think just to add to that, as a team, it was also making sure that the CCGs owned their individual plans, because I guess across North West London, we've been working as a team across the 8, and people are used to us doing things for them on their behalf. And this was one project where we actually met up with CCG colleagues and made sure that the plans were signed off and that they owned them. The essence of this programme was really about nothing new. It was really about maximising the use of existing primary and community capacity, understanding what was out there, which I think people found useful, looking not just at the capacity, and as I've said before, it's really about looking at the capability as well. So what could community providers do? And for some CCGs, that was actually a really insightful opportunity, because they were able to have those conversations with their community providers, and in some respects had to adjust some of their specifications to meet the needs of what we needed to deliver. Audit plays a real key part in this, because it needs to be evidence-based. I think the opportunity that we had here was we did 2 sets of audit. We audited the forms. The forms were brilliant around real-life data, because we have them at our fingertips. We didn't have to wait for SUS data. We could really interrogate the forms and see what was going on to that level of granularity. But what we did as well was that our clinical team went out to the hospital trust, which is part of what we do anyway, and they audited the notes to make sure that what they were putting on the forms, the boxes that they were ticking, really was what the outcomes were in secondary care, just to give the CCGs and ourselves just that additional level of assurance. So ECCG were signed up as part of their QUIP plan. They owned the QUIP plan. They signed the model off. They came with us along the journey and helped us build the model, and they also helped us build the risk to delivery. And I think, what was really helpful for us as a team is that we really got good opportunity to work with the planned care and primary care leads to ensure that appropriate activity was being diverted from secondary care, and we were not building a model with new demand. So therefore that we were pulling the activity that we needed to pull, and we weren't just developing activity that should be done at GP practice. And that was part of the conversation, was also a reiteration of the bog standard stuff should be done in primary care anyway, before you even go anywhere near a DED, or before you even go anywhere near a community provider. So I'm sure people want to know what the tangible benefits are, and month 3 performance review shows that the QUIP savings are on track, and this is according to the data that we get from our business intelligence team that we validated at least 3 times, and we are 4% above plan. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Did you want to add anything?
Yes.
Do you want to add anything at this stage? No. Okay. Thank you for that. I'm sure we'll get some questions through. A couple of reflections from me to start off with. So interestingly, you certainly have asked a question about performance, which you alluded to at the end there, definite downtrend. as you're aware, things are delivered differently in different parts of the country. CCGs make their own decisions. But it's interesting how you've gone for a shift from secondary to primary care activity. But across the country, no, there's not always primary care activity or capacity. So in the area I work, in Buckinghamshire, for example, there is no DES, and there is very little primary care benign skin lesion activity at all, on the basis that the evidence of doing the procedure is evidence wherever it is done. So my question there is, are you now counting the primary care activity when you look at your total activity? Have you got then a before and after? Will you have a primary care activity to add to the secondary care activity?
Yes, so when we did the model, we had both activities in place while we were communicating with them. But the issue with death practice activity is we only look at it on a quarterly basis because there's a lot of work which primary care leads have to do with the NHS and then need to get that data. So what we decided was on a monthly basis, we will use the baseline to see is the activity in secondary care going down. And that's where we are showing 4% we are above plan.
Yep.
And every quarter we will be receiving data from primary care leads, which we are waiting this month now for quarter 1 to show how it actually matches. Has the activity gone up there and it is due to the demand, or is it due to just that thing which were happening in secondary care that are actually shifting into the primary care now?
Okay, so my challenge back to you would be, if your increase in demand in primary care reflects your decrease in demand in secondary care, what's the achievement? That's a tough question.
Yeah.
That's a tough question. What's the achievement? This is an evidence-based program. So, I think someone's going to ask that question anyway. So I'm going to ask that question now. We want to see a reduction in activity, not a shift in activity.
So don't forget this model is about re-emphasising primary care and what GPs, so it's a gatekeeping throughout the whole pathway.
Yeah.
So it's what GPs and primary care should be doing in their surgery.
That should still be evidence-based.
It's still evidence-based. What they should be doing in theirs and the community provision, and what they should be doing in secondary care. So I would expect those levers in that there should be even a reduction in the deaths, because this was an opportunity for us to re-look at actually who's monitoring what's going on in primary care.
Absolutely. So there's an issue about making sure we see a appropriate delivery wherever it's delivered.
Yeah. Just to add to that, so we have our own PPWT forms. When the GP practices do inter-practice referrals, they still use the policy to refer the patient and complete the intra-practice referral form, which is in line with our policy. So as you know, we do an audit anyway on secondary care. We are planning to do an audit on those forms as well. So we don't want to add any barriers in there where they have to send us everything even to do intra-practice referrals. Just to speed that up, yes, you fill up the form if you're happy, send it through. We'll be doing retrospective audits to see what exactly has happened within this year. So this is the first year running, month 3 just gone. So around month 7, we are planning to do that too.
Okay. Did you want to come in?
Yeah, and so from my perspective as well, one of the real benefits of this is around aligning your policies. You reiterate you've got your prior approval processes in there, which are embedded anyway. You'll be using them and continue to use those to be able to manage that kind of cut-off point around making sure that they're in line with policy. And the audit work that you're doing as well is kind of your QA at the end of it to make sure that they're in line. So, reiterating your message around it doesn't matter whether it's from secondary or primary care, that, the emphasis is still it's around your policy has been agreed and implemented, and it's aligned across all of your CCGs so that there's, it's reducing any unwarranted variation and making sure that it's consistent access across your population.
Yeah.
Okay, let's pick up some questions coming in from the attendees there. The one there is all about audits. I think that's Geraldine Woods, because this had lined up. The one about 2-week waits. So did you find there are a number of 10-week waits were downgraded after diagnostics? So this certainly this particular clinical area, there is in an argument about if it's 2-week waitable, then it goes through the process.
Yeah.
If it's not 2 waitable, we get through a whole quagmire of what is actually clinically appropriate. We sort of touched on that earlier. So have you seen any difference in your 2-week wait conversion rate? The consequence of this, have you looked at that?
Yeah, so I guess the 2-week wait is outside the scope of our policy.
But there is absolutely, because there's a question about the downgrading of the 2-week wait.
When we were looking at the data, when I said in the presentation that we looked at two-week wait, that was the sus data. So to build our model, we had the full sus data, and we removed the two-week wait, and we also removed cancer upgrades as well, just so we've got pure benign skin lesions policy. But our policy quite clearly says if a patient looks as if they're two-week wait or are two-week wait, then just refer on.
So I get that. I think the substance of the question is that we know people game the system. So therefore, if you put a policy that restricts benign skin lesions, there is an argument that says you'll see an increase in two-week wait referrals, and therefore a lower conversion rate on your two-week waits, because people will be putting their previously benign into a two-week wait.
Okay.
So the GP may make a decision to say, actually, I think this needs to come off. I can't get it done now. I've done the new policy stringent. I'm going to make it a two-week wait. That will then lead to a conversion rate change.
That's a good point, Geraldine. We should add that to the KPI.
Okay.
Yeah,
definitely. You follow what we're saying?
Yeah, because it might pop up somewhere else in the system.
Yeah. So
we focus so much on primary and community care. Actually, the two-week wait we need
the
to
old
talk about
balloon
as well.
squeeze it one way and pops out somewhere else. So
Absolutely.
that's I think the substance of that question. I think there. Try to read these questions here. Right. So about that last question there from the STP. Do you have a robust advice and policy guide embedded into the pathway? So GPs are supported. So it's a policy embedded in. So is it easy? I think the question summarising that one from Kavita is it straightforward? Can GPs access the information in a straightforward manner to make sure they're following the pathway effectively?
Yes, all our policies are published online, and we launch it every year just to do refresh anyway. GPs use EMIS and System 1. These policies are published online, so they don't have to go anywhere.
Right.
Forms are also downloaded on EMIS and System 1, so they can just do it online and submit to us.
We have a helpline.
At hand,
We have a GP helpline, so we have a medical advisor attached to the team. So if there are any queries, we have a generic inbox, and they can raise those queries there. And she's physically there a couple of days a week, and we often have GPs ringing up, and she can have that clinical conversation.
Because that's it. We need good availability of that advice and guide. So we want people to follow policies. We need to make it very accessible. There's a question up here coming about yours. This is the naughty question. Your starting point. So there's a point about production activity. Where were you though at the start? Were you somebody who was such an outlier that you could that it was? I think that I'm changing. I'm changing the question. To say, was it easy for you to reduce your activity because you were so far offline? That's me.
No, I
that's
think
me
we were
naughtily changing the question.
because we were already managing our referrals quite well. We have a claim systems in place. Therefore, we are already on a monthly basis monitoring our activity. But this was still a good opportunity for us to maximize our debt resources.
It wasn't an easy. Basically, it wasn't an easy hit for you. That's, I think.
No, it involved so much of work from everywhere.
Yeah, so if you look at the NHS BSA dashboard, North West London is actually, you're doing really well. You're definitely in the higher kind of 26th quartile of how you're performing. So it's not that it was an easy task what they've done. They were a good performing. Right.
So David Childs has come in a question, which is one of the things I noted down as my backup question if no one asks questions, which was, how do you assess a patient's functional impairment? You talked about functionality thresholds, I think, when you were presenting.
Yeah.
So that's the question. It is about, there's an element of subjectivity in that. How do we...
So it's the clinic letter. So when they take any thresholds on the OG or PPWT form, they have to give some narrative to support what they're taking. So in terms of functionality, they give us detailed evidence on what the patient is experiencing. So they have a skin tag somewhere which is catching clothes, or how it is actually limiting their daily activities. They actually emphasize on that.
So I understand that. I guess it's making sure that is, I guess it's making sure that converts into some sort of objective decision-making process.
Yeah.
So some of those forms are clinically reviewed, is that the question?
All the lines in forms are clinically reviewed. And reviewed by managers.
So that you've got to have robustness in the process. Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting though, take it to the point where the story is coming is probably not the story the patient who turns up in front with their skin tag, which is nowhere near their bra line or whatever it is, and what happens then? They've got through the process, presumably they already had a procedure. You find that in audit, won't you, afterwards? They if the referral actually
When we are doing a
embellished.
clinical audit, yes.
Yeah.
But we do trust our GPs and clinicians to give actual information. They have assessed the patient. So whatever they're putting on the form, we have to rely on.
Don't forget, I can say to the GP, don't forget, we are fiercely our patients' advocates, so we will strongly push the story for the patient. So sometimes that translates into something more subjective.
It is based on the fact that it's self-monitoring. So as Tracy said, we rely on people to tick the boxes and to provide that supporting information. That's how the system was built all along, was that it's built on a system of trust.
And if you've seen a traction, then it's making progress.
We wouldn't question clinicians.
There's a question up earlier on about IFR, which is something that's come up in the programme board, actually, about counting IFRs. Do you have information about, from David Lautman earlier on, do you have information about the individual, the IFR approved for exceptionality? Places several years now, I'll jump around the question. You moved the question, I can't see it again now. Where's it gone? Yeah, it is. Several years now. Reduction might be up smaller than. No, I think it's
so he's asking is, do you have any information about the number of individual funds requests being approved? So I don't know, David, whether that is just for benign skin lesions or in total.
The question is relevant to everything. Really.
So it's relevant to everything. And what I'd say to people is that every year we produce a IFR annual report. If you Google North West London IFR annual report, it will give you all the information. We're just about, it's retrospective, so the year behind, but it will give you at least the last 3 or 4 years by procedure, by approval, by those that were declined, and also tells you about the policies that we've reviewed that year as well. So I suggest that's probably the best place for you to look at.
Can I ask a more broad question? Do you think that level of IFR recording is the same across the country, or are you particularly good at that data collection? You may not know.
No, I wouldn't know.
It's just that we've had that conversation, haven't we, about nationally trying to work out, can we see how we collect the IFR data? It's not easy from a coding perspective to pull it.
Yeah, I guess we collect it from
our
own database and our own system. And we track that patient through. So because it's an individual funding request, there's not that many of them, and we've seen over the last few years that they've reduced quite considerably. And I think, to be honest, a lot of the IFRs don't get past clinical triage because it gets more and more challenging, especially as you're working across the 8, to really demonstrate that there's even a case for going forward to look at clinical exceptionality. Because if there is a cohort, then, it's good practice to say that in triage. If you put it in front of a panel, then they have a duty to make a decision.
David come back saying it's just a BSL, but the question's about, I think, pertinent for
so we can send that data, David. I think on the slide, the PPWT inbox, the generic email address, I should have said to everyone, is there. So if people want to email us on an individual basis, we do get back to people, just let us know.
Question there from, just go down again, please. I'll just read the one, the Kavita again, to pronounce my question. That's right at the bottom. Oh, there it is, okay. So does the acute sector triage all dermatology referrals to ensure inappropriate referrals are then redirected back to primary care? So having come through your form, do they then get further clinical triage? And the question is there that Kavita is coming up.
I think that's work in progress. There's an outpatient modernisation programme, and I know that dermatology in itself, including benign skin lesions, is one of the areas where they're looking at doing that. How far it is in terms of the process, I'm not sure.
So that's potential for further reduction?
And we did say year 1, year 1 was almost a pilot. Year 2, I think the contractual lever would have been stronger, but you actually then say, well, we've got the confidence that the capacity and capability is elsewhere outside secondary care, and the conversation that we've had with our contracting colleagues is it's only as good as the baseline from the activity that you reduce in your contracts, because then that makes everybody's behaviour change, I think.
Going back to the question at the top there from Chris Room, which is sort of alluded to what I said earlier on, he's actually saying that how are you assured that primary care activity is compliance with policy? So you said about the forms going in, but then it wasn't quite clear, are those forms then checked against DES claims?
No, so those are intra-practice referral forms. So we are expecting our GPs to use our policy, complete the form, and then make a referral. Nobody is checking at that stage. The audit I was talking about was retrospective audit once a year to go back and look at those forms to see whatever they're putting on the forms, do your records show the same thing? So similar audit which we do in secondary care, we were going to replicate that into primary care and community care as well. So if a GP is going to send a patient to community care, they will still do the same intra-practice referral form, and community care will review the patient. If they can treat it, they will treat it. Otherwise, they will do the form and send it to us and explain us why they can't treat it and it has to go to a secondary care provider. So all of that will be covered in the second part of the audit, which we'll be doing around month 7.
Okay. So it's interesting. Again, my experience locally in Buckinghamshire, this is different in activity. So the Buckinghamshire policy is it's a 2-week wait or it's an IFR. There is nothing in between. The benign skin lesions are not dealt with at all. Primary, secondary community care, nowhere. It has to be an IFR, so no primary care activity. So it's interesting how that's a very, very strict policy where I work. Whereas you've clearly got a policy that allows some activity that's non-2-week wait under range stringent guidance that you've already got. Yeah. Okay, there's a question further down for Nicola actually. It's about NHS. Is that somebody, that one there from Geraldine Woods? Everything described so far has been in place for several years, therefore reduction is likely to be smaller than others areas. And just implementing this, does NHS England recognise this? The highlighted question. You read it. So basically, you're saying everything described so far in our area has been in place for several years, therefore our reduction activity is likely to be smaller than other areas. Because it already doesn't work.
Yeah,
so
that's fine.
Does NHS England recognise this?
Yeah, so they should recognise it. So,
okay, yes, yeah, they should. It's the question, it's the problem.
Yeah, so, I mean, if you have a look at, Geraldine, if you have a look at the NHS BSA dashboard, you'll be able to see there where we can clearly track what the activity is across all the different CCGs and STPs and where. So, for example, Buckinghamshire and North West London, where they have already implemented effective systems and have good benign skin lesion policies, you can see that they are either below or within the range that we're expecting these CCGs and STBs to be around their activity of benign skin lesions. So they either don't need to achieve a reduction or the reduction they need to achieve is minimal. And then, obviously, the scale the variation carries on across the country, which we are assuming is to do with the fact that the benign skin lesion policies aren't quite as effective or as embedded as the ones such as Buckinghamshire and North West London, where the expected reduction is a lot less or in some cases none. We'll send the details for the NHS BSA dashboard along with the slides after this webinar. So if you haven't been able to access that information to be able to view the variation across England, you would be able to access it then and have a look at those data, look at those figures and that data.
But it will only show the dashboard ratio of the secondary care activity.
It does only show secondary.
So here we've got an interesting discussion about primary care activity. So there is an issue in areas that may not be as stringent as yours about actually, and something we discussed in the programme board is our anxiety about there being a secondary to primary care shift. And then on the top line dashboard data would look better, but actually the local activity hasn't shifted. I'm not saying that's in your case, I'm saying that's something we've debated before, isn't it, about what happens to that almost lost activity in primary care, and that is happening sometimes in the country.
Yours is a good example though, just that Buckinghamshire don't have any primary care activity, however you're still under the expected activity that we are requiring and what the expectation is across England. So that's a really interesting point you say around that has been a discussion around shifting activity from secondary care into primary, but you know, Buckinghamshire is a brilliant example where that can't be skewing the figures because you don't have it anyway, just using your secondary care activity numbers and you're within line. So it'd be interesting to understand if somebody isn't, if that's the rationale that they're using, what's happening around that.
And I guess that intelligence about knowing what we can go out to get to find it, knowing what the intelligence is about, what is the penetration of primary care delivery of these services. Certainly, I think nobody, looking at some CCGs have squeezed. Certainly, there may be people that had days off from primary care. This sort of minor ops in the past have now taken out, although it's small money compared to small money compared to some of the big ticket items. But I think CCGs are looking for anything to help the bottom line there. Okay, and all questions coming in. General question, Devon. It's similar to about 32, I think the other end. Okay, so from Chris there in Devon, he's basically saying similar process that we do have in Bucks with two-week wait or IFR. People generally going to adapt to the far less stringent interest policy. Devon's very worried about activity implications. Do you want to answer that one, Nicola? Can you read that one? It's in grey at the bottom. Can you read that bit? I'll read it out for you.
Yeah, go on, sorry.
Right. So, sorry, everyone in the line. Nicola can't read the question. So, general question. Devon is similar to Bucks in a 2-week wait or IFR. I think other areas are also similar. Are people generally going to adopt the far less stringent NHSE policy? Devon is very worried about activity implications. This is a conversation that reflects in other areas we've had in the programme board, isn't it, about setting the line?
It does, and I mean, the position that I would take and NHSE would take is we would want you to adopt the policies that we have published, which that's the one that we've worked very closely with the Royal Colleges to get agreements and sign upon, and the one that's based on the latest evidence. I mean, as you're aware, there is wording within the NHS and the contract to allow CCGs to make their own decisions because of the way that governance is, and you should have that right to do so. But our position, it would be that we would be expecting you to adopt the EBI guidance as so. And I mean, North West London, you're pretty much aligned with the EBI guidance.
And to be honest, it might be that North West London decide to look at it again.
Yeah.
We're always looking at policies and we're always having to make difficult decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, my view would be, obviously, you know, we really want you to adopt the evidence-based position that we've published. But there is that exception where if you want to make those amendments. Graham was a very big advocate to ensure that
I'm going to say something now. So the NHS Clinical Commissioner's position on this, and this has been an ongoing debate, a very friendly debate between NHSCC and NHS England, is that where CCGs have gone further, I think this is where Chris is alluding to in his question, where CCGs have gone further, we were very, very strongly advocating to protect CCGs and say, if you've made that decision locally, in Devon or Buckinghamshire, wherever it is, and you've made it based on an evidence base, and you've made it based on the population statistic, you've made it based good clinical decision that you're commissioning your services for your population in a holistic way, then actually you should be allowed to have that policy if it's in place. Julie was a great advocate of this as well in the programme board. We came to an agreed disagreement between NHS England and NHSCC about this, and actually the wording of the policy, the EBI programme policy wording is subtly allows both solutions to go through. And we're still friends and still at the same table making the same conversations. But I think the problem is that actually there are a number of CCGs, not only in this area, but in other areas, supported by their priorities committees, have had to make very difficult decisions. And we talk about tough commissioning decisions we have to make all the time. That's the reality. Okay, well, look at the time. We've got a couple of minutes left. I'm looking at that last question coming in. Are you reading it? So the last question, is that about IFR 2 wait? Have we answered that already, or is that slightly different? Is there any recognition that activity levels in areas where they are IFR 2 wait will only potentially be skewing the activity target nationally? Oh, I see you mean what you're saying is actually where there's already a more stringent policy, it will change the 25th percentile line on a national basis. That potentially has an implication for everyone if you're taking a line in the sand.
It does have an implication, and that's the point that we have recognised, and we need to do a little bit more number crunching and a little bit more of a deep dive analysis into that, looking at what the policies are that are in place for the lowest 25th percentile to be able to make a judgment call on whether that is actually skewing what that baseline figure is and what we're aiming to achieve.
What I would say is that when we had a conversation at the programme board throughout last year about where we put the cut, where we put the recommended, we were quite lenient on that.
We were quite.
So we thought about going for a higher cut. So in fact, already by coming for a lower cut, it may well have attenuated that particular issue about the data being potentially skewed. So it may well be, if that makes sense to people, we went for a lower target. So that may have taken that into case to make the target achievable.
A more lenient target.
A more lenient target, yes. More achievable lenient target. Whatever the wording is, but it's lower high is the wrong word to use, isn't it? More lenient than some wanted, so shall we say. Okay, so that last question there from Julie is about the evidence base is secure, but actually about some internal consistency. So again, psychological distress in children, I guess that comes back to your subjective story, isn't it? Yeah, subjectivity element. I don't think we're ever going to understand that, how we land that subjectivity issue, because there isn't a metric subjectivity.
And I guess picking up the slide in Eve, I think it was felt in North West London that there was lots of other cosmetic cases that we didn't find outside of benign skin lesions.
Yeah. Okay, and then there's a question saying, can we have a bit more feedback on that? I mean, we can do that later.
Yeah, we can give the contact details.
The debt. The actually was a conversation about the debt. I think there was some more clarity.
Yeah.
So we can.
We've got the email address. You can email it. We
can fix that in. Okay, I think we're running out of time. Thank you for the contributions online. Varied questions. Thank you for our presenters. There is a Twitter chat tonight that we're going to promote. Nicola, we're going to promote that?
Yes, so Martin Marshall, he is one of our Expert Advisory Committee co-chairs who is working on the development of the second phase of the EBI programme. And so he is hosting a Twitter chat about the evidence-based interventions programme and a general conversation to get views, ideas, experience and understanding of how people have found the EBI programme to date, and that is between 5 and 6 p.m. this evening. And if you would like to join that, you need to use the hashtag NHSEBI Twitter. We'll send that after this with the slides and with the link to the NHS BSA dashboard.
So thank you all for contributing. This is, there'll be more of these webinars. This EBI programme is here to stay for quite some time. As Nicola said, there's a second phase coming through. Thank the demonstrator community for their contribution over the last couple of meetings I've been engaged with. There's more to come from their engagement. This is a national programme with a number of strong leadership issues from the Academy Royal Colleges, NICE, Institute of England, HSCC. So this is a good programme working through. It's tough. The data is beginning to move, but if we are trying to provide evidence-based care for our patients, which is appropriate and using NHS resources properly, this is the right thing to do, although it can be quite difficult sometimes. So thank you all for contributing. Thank you to us.